All right, let's dive in. So again, thank you for joining us today to hear a little bit more about the Stibnite Gold Project and what we here at Perpetua Resources are doing to move this project forward. Again, my name is Mckinsey Lyon. I am the Vice President of External Affairs for Perpetua and really appreciate the opportunity to get to talk with you all. And again, sorry for any future disruptions, as it is a snow day and children are home. But we'll start on the first slide, Alyssa. Or next slide. Thank you. So first, I want to just preface the conversation very quickly that our goal today is to provide a very high-level overview of where the project is in the permitting process and how excited we are that the Forest Service recently published the supplemental draft EIS. However, this is not a technical deep dive. So if you're interested in learning more specific information on a particular area, I encourage you to go to our website on our webinars page, where we have posted some of our recent webinars that do a much deeper dive on things like infrastructure or environmental impacts. So those webinars are there with our technical experts walking through the supplemental draft EIS. But we also have office hours as listed here, where about once a week we open up the Zoom world with our team to take your questions and to hear more about what you're thinking and what you want us to know about your thoughts on the project. Next slide. So to start, our project is located in central Idaho, about 4 hours from where I am in Boise, and the project is in the Payette National Forest. Next slide. And if I were to tell you 3 things that I think it is the most important things to know about the Stibnite Gold Project, I would say first is that our project is located on an abandoned mine site that is in desperate need for help. And our project is designed to make the site better than it is today, to provide a net value to the environmental conditions at site. The second thing to know about the Stibnite Gold Project is that it will be the only U.S. mined source of the critical mineral antimony, which is critical both for our national defense and our energy future and many of the products we use every single day. Unfortunately, the mineral is controlled by China, Russia, and Tajikistan, and our project has the ability to end that foreign reliance. And finally, the third thing to know is that as a company, we have very much prioritized community partnerships and environmental responsibility alongside the safe and economic production of the minerals our country needs. And it is this approach that we believe really is the future for what responsible domestic mineral production looks like in America. Next slide. So moving this project forward has been a labor of love, and we're really excited to share with you some of the progress we've made, particularly over the last 6 years of permitting. So after these 6 years of being in the regulatory review process, the regulatory review, the science that has been applied to the outcomes of the project, public feedback, all of these things have improved the project outcomes, and we're really proud of it, and we're really ready to move it forward. But it's been public input and the process that has made this project better. Secondly, the project is going to provide net benefits to this historically mined site, leaving water quality, habitat, and rivers better than they are today. And finally, it is more important than ever that we regain control of the critical minerals like antimony that are urgently needed to support the clean energy transition and national defense. And it is this awareness that is helping our project move forward as well. Next slide. So before we can understand the proposed future for Stibnite, I think it's really important to take a step back for a moment and to know its history. Next slide. So the Stibnite mining district has a long history that goes back to like 1899, when mining first started in this region for gold and silver. But the site didn't take position as essential or prominent until the eve of World War II, when the United States didn't have a source of tungsten and antimony needed for the war effort, because we were getting both from China, and the blockade in the Pacific meant we no longer had access to this critically needed supply. So the government set out, and they found both tungsten and antimony at Stibnite, Idaho, and commissioned the then mining company, the Bradley Mining Company, who was at Stibnite, to produce both for the war. And the men and women of Stibnite, Idaho went on to produce the majority of tungsten and antimony used in World War II, and were then credited with having shortened World War II by a year and saving 1 million American lives. This is how important it is to source these minerals here at home. Next slide. And so while we have, this legacy to be so proud of here in central Idaho, there's also an environmental legacy on the other side of that coin that was left behind. So water is heavily degraded with arsenic and antimony from millions of tons of legacy tailings and waste that are unlined that were left behind. Today, the headwaters of the Salmon River, the East Fork, South Fork of the Salmon River, flows into an abandoned mining pit, which has blocked salmon migration to 20 miles of habitat for the last 80 years. And overall, habitat conditions are degraded. But between 2000 and 2012, there were 3 CERCLA decrees signed oversight that absolved the former operators and the U.S. agencies from any future responsibility for the environmental conditions at site. That means at this point, there are no other immediate solutions to addressing these legacies that were left behind. And that is where we come in. Next slide, please. So while this is a brownfield site, which means it's been mined before, we also know that there is a robust mineral reserve and resource still available at Stibnite today. So the project economics are built on 4.8 million ounces of gold, which allows for the production of the 148 million pounds of antimony resource and for the restoration of legacy features. So put simply, without the gold, it wouldn't be feasible to clean up the site or to produce antimony. Next slide. So we have always known that if we were going to go back to Stibnite, if we were going to redevelop Stibnite for gold and antimony, we would have to bring with it, with our plan, solutions for the environmental legacies that remain behind. And we would have to earn the trust of our communities and build partnership with our communities as well. So from the very beginning, 12 years ago, this vision has guided the development and design of our project and how we as a team have interacted with our communities. Next slide. And so for the last 12 years, we've been diligently moving this vision forward. And it really starts with the design of the project. And I'll walk through that a little bit now. Next slide. So in the first years of construction, our plan is designed to solve the largest source of sedimentation in the watershed, to then, as we move into operations, to pick up, reprocess, and safely store the millions of tons of legacy tailings and legacy waste that remain behind. Doing this will improve water quality today. And then finally, we've also designed the project to address fish migration, first through a temporary tunnel, fish passageway, and then finally through the restoration of the river so that fish can swim immediately through the project beginning, and then have a fully restored river in the middle of the project. Next slide. So just really quickly to kind of understand kind of what we're working with at site today and what the project will include. Today, there are 2 open pits remaining at Stibnite, both the Yellow Pine Pit and the West End Pit. We will remine these, making them larger. We will then fully backfill the Yellow Pine Pit. We also, if you can see on this map, the Hanger Flats Pit. That is an area that today contains the old heap leach operations that were at Stibnite, a lot of underground workings, and the old smelter site. In our project, we will also mine this in an open pit and then fully backfill it as well. We will then have, you can see on the map where that tailings storage facility is. That is on top of today the spent ore disposal area, which are old tailings and waste. We'll pick that up, as mentioned earlier, reprocess that where we can, or reuse material, but safely store any material that needs to be stored in the tailings storage facility from our project. So a quick high-level overview to read this map. All of that light greenish yellow color, those are the historical impacts left behind at Stibnite, land that has been disturbed previously. Our footprint is that purple hatched. So you can see that wherever possible, we are trying to operate our project on top of previous disturbance. Overall, about 51% of the project footprint is on land that has already been historically impacted. And then, of course, because it's already been, or for those places that are historically impacted that overlap our project, also gives us the opportunity to address and remediate those conditions whenever and wherever possible. Next slide. So fish passage, as I mentioned, is an important component of this, which includes, in order to remine the Yellow Pine Pit, we need to reroute the East Fork, South Fork Salmon River temporarily. In doing so, we wanted to see if we could identify and use the opportunity to get fish once again swimming past this pit where they've been stuck for so long. And so we've designed the system as a fish passageway, or a series of weirs that takes into specific consideration the needs of the 3 species on site: Chinook salmon, bull trout, and steelhead, and when they're migrating up. And great news that the supplemental draft DIS concludes that there is enough empirical evidence of these best practices that have been woven into our design working across the globe, so that this can likely provide an immediate solution to getting fish past this pit for the first time in 80 years. Next slide. But again, this is only temporary, because starting in year 7 of mining, we begin backfilling the Yellow Pine Pit so that we can reconstruct the East Fork, South Fork Salmon River over the top. And one of my favorite things that we've been able to do with this project over the last many years of public review and input is to really enhance the design of how to restore that river that, again, today just dumps into an abandoned mining pit. But through our process that allows us to backfill that pit, we can actually reconstruct this river to a restoration standard rather than just a reclamation standard. And that's a great example of how over time our project has evolved. In the beginning, we thought, well, yeah, let's put the river back. And really it was like, well, let's put it back from point A to point B over a backfilled pit. But working with local experts on river restoration, they really challenged us to say, well, what if you built the backfill like a floodplain, so that the river over time can meander and weave and behave like a natural system? And what if you allowed it to meander more, to create more quality habitat, allowed it to braid in with other streams, so that you're creating varying levels of habitat for different needs in the life cycle of a fish, whether they are a smolt or a juvenile that needs rearing in a cool, quiet place, or an adult that's just trying to swim up. So it's a really cool example of how we can make the site better. In fact, we've been able to increase the project stream function analysis, which is basically what is the quality of these streams, to 9.5% over what is existing there today. And a lot of other benefits have gone into designing this system as a net benefit. Next slide. And in doing so, in opening up fish passage, this is a really helpful little graphic that shows you what's accessible today. So the light blue or the light green or baseline, that means what can fish access today? Basically, that stops at the Yellow Pine Pit. But with both the fish tunnel and then complete volitional passage established through the reconstruction of the river, those darker green or darker blue lines is showing where we're expanding accessible habitat, over 8 miles for bull trout and 12 miles for Chinook. This is a remarkable benefit to both species. Next slide. We've also worked really hard on identifying, well, what's the best way to access the site? And from an infrastructure standpoint, we really looked at 3 things. What's an opportunity that allows us to avoid traveling in parallel to major waterways? We looked for an option that would also help reduce the interaction with recreational and residential travel. And we looked for an option that would avoid many known avalanche or slide paths to help improve the safety of our travel. And in doing so, and in talking with our local communities, it became clear that this burnt log route, or a route that combines 2 old roads, an old logging road and an old mining road together, and accessing the site from the south. Whereas today, you would travel along the South Fork Road or Johnson Creek to Yellow Pine, down Stibnite Road and into Stibnite from the northern end of the site. But that path both parallels major waterways. It takes us through heavy recreational areas and the town of Yellow Pine, and Stibnite Road has many known avalanche and slide paths, so it's not our preferred route. Next slide. So where are we in the permitting process? Here is a quick overview. Next slide. We are in our 6th year of review under NEPA. The NEPA process has been led by the Payette Forest of the U.S. Forest Service. And I think we can all honestly say that the process of rigorous scientific review, of public input and revision has improved the environmental and the social aspects of our process, of our project. So this included in 2020, the Forest Service released the draft environmental impact statement for a 75-day public comment period. From there, we now have the supplemental draft environmental impact statement that was released in October for another 75 days of public review. On this schedule, we are hopeful for a record of decision in late 2023 or early 2024, which would put us on track for production in around 2027, should everything stay on track. Next slide. So we heard a lot. So this is an example of kind of how the project is improved over time and through the NEPA process. So in 2020, we heard there are over 10,000 comments into the Forest Service, and we heard a number of things that were basically, hey, can you reduce the project footprint? Can you improve water quality? And can you reduce water temperature? And in reviewing all of the public comments and agency comments, and taking out these 3 main components, we said, yeah, we think we can. So we submitted back to the Forest Service a range of modifications to our design that included making Hanger Flats Pit 70% smaller than it was and completely backfilling it, to removing the Fiddle waste rock area completely. Both of those things reducing our footprint of the project and helping to improve water quality. We've added covers or geosynthetic covers and liners on top of pits and backfills and the tailing storage facility buttress at fairly great expense, but we have found that it will help improve water quality. So all of these things are moving forward into what is now the supplemental draft environmental impact statement and our modified mine plan. Next slide. So here's kind of how that process has worked. So the draft EIS in 2020 showed 5 alternatives. The first alternative was our original plan from 2016. The alternative 2 was our modified plan. This was a plan that after some feedback within the process, we made some changes, but it was our preferred plan design. Then the forest also evaluated things like moving the tailing storage facility to a new location, or taking the existing routes into site rather than Burnt Log Road, and of course, also reviewed the no action. So from that 2020 alternative 2, our proposed changes were applied, and now the forest is bringing that forward in the supplemental draft environmental impact statement for additional public review. So now the modified mine plan, which is our proposal, all of those changes plus the burnt log road, is being compared to all of those plan changes and the what if of using the Johnson Creek route, the current route into Stibnite, as the mine plan access route. Thankfully, and we're very happy that the Forest Service has identified our plan, which includes access to Burnt Log Road, as the preferred alternative. Next slide, please. So the agency identifying our modified mine plan as a preferred alternative is important. And they did so, and when they did so, they said, we have made this the preferred, or identified this as the preferred alternative because it has improved water quality, because it has eliminated the need for permanent water treatment, because it has improved water temperature, because this transportation route, Burnt Log Road, is the safest for the community and the environment, and because this proposal meets the purpose and need of NEPA. Next slide. So some of the great things that we're seeing out of the supplemental include, we're seeing a 40% reduction in arsenic in the East Fork, South Fork, Salmon River leaving site. So that river, once it leaves Stibnite, is 40% better, or 40% lower arsenic than it has today, or 47% less arsenic in that river on site at Stibnite, which is an incredible benefit to the river and river habitat at Stibnite today. That also includes a 60% reduction in arsenic. We've seen a 5% change or reduction, or not 5%, a 5°C reduction in water temperature from the last plan. And that's really important because it means that all of those best practices that we've applied to our updated design worked to reduce water temperature. And as I mentioned before, we see an elevation in overall river functional units. Next slide. From a standpoint of fish habitat, a great outcome being designated here in the supplemental draft DIS, that by opening up this access, these 20 miles of habitat, we get a major, permanent, regional, and beneficial effect on Chinook, on steelhead, on bull trout, and cutthroat within the vicinity of the mine. We couldn't hope for anything better than that, because that is what we have been aiming for from day one. How can we use mining and opening up this habitat and improving habitat conditions to help these species? And we're very excited to see this confirmed in the supplemental. Next slide. As I mentioned before, we've also done a lot over the last many years to reduce the overall footprint of the project. So overall, we've had a 13% reduction in site disturbance. As I mentioned, that's a 51% of our project footprint is on previously disturbed areas. Some of these changes have included, reducing overall mine volume by 10%, that shrinking and backfill, as I mentioned earlier, of the Hanger Flats pit, and a 60% reduction in our mercury emissions. So, and a 23% reduction in our traffic. And all of these things have come from listening to the public and using science and the review process to continually and in an iterative fashion review, modify, and refine our project design. Next slide. So other conclusion from the supplemental that's important to note is, of course, the value of Burnt Log Road, that by taking this alternate route into site, which does include 38 miles of new and existing road, and improving those, linking and improving those roads, that it's reducing hazards. And it really is the safest route for us to get into Stibnite to transport our people and goods in and out. Next slide. So, and then of course, it's really important that the process continue to move forward, not because we can bring these great environmental net benefits to the site, but also because we can be the nation's only mined source of their critical mineral antimony. And that's really important for our American future. We would be able to satisfy in the first 6 years of operations about 35% of commercial US demand in just those first 6 years of production. Next slide. And this matters because without a domestic supply, we really are vulnerable. So today, China, Russia, and Tajikistan control about 90% of the global supply of antimony. And again, we have no primary source here, but we need it. And we need it because antimony has long been essential in strengthening alloys, in making them resistant to corrosion, and as a flame retardant. It's also used in solar panels and semiconductors, in the primers and many military munitions. It is also key to liquid metal battery technology. And just this year, Congress took note and added antimony reporting requirements to the National Defense Authorization Act. And the Defense Logistics Agency awarded Perpetua with 2 grants to study antimony from stibnite for defense uses. Next slide. Some of you may remember that in 2021, we entered into a partnership agreement with Ambri, a US company working on a stationary battery storage system called a liquid metal battery that requires 2 things, antimony and calcium. So the agreement states that a portion of our antimony will go to the manufacturing of these batteries. It's important for a number of reasons, but the one I like the most is that under this agreement, our antimony can power about 13 gigawatt hours of battery capacity on a daily cycle for 20 years. So to put that in context, that's like powering 1 million American homes with solar for 20 years. And that is a remarkable step forward on our clean energy goals, not only as a country, but as a globe. Next slide. So really quickly, a little bit more about what we've been doing as a company. Next slide. So as I've mentioned, we've been really focused over the last 12 years on how to become the responsible, safe, and beneficial partner that our communities not only need, but demand. And so the things that we've put into action are examples of how American mining is prioritizing community, environmental outcomes, and safety, and really establishing that it's more than just words. We are more than our words, or our slogan of restore the site. We've been putting our words into action for over 12 years now. So everything from our dark skies commitments to planting 65,000 trees on site or in the region, having 8 years of no reportable spills, our community agreement that establishes transparency and accountability in our citizens' water monitoring program. All of these are focused on how we put our words into action and earn the trust that it takes to move forward on a project like this. Next slide. And of course, the Stibnite Advisory Council is a great opportunity for anyone to get involved who wants to know more. So this is an agreement that we made in 2018 with 8 of our local communities. And the community agreement establishes a forum for monthly conversation between representatives of these communities and leadership at the company. And that is guaranteed from 2018 through the life of the project. And it's already been utilized as an opportunity not only for information finding from our communities where, they've asked for information and we're able to provide that information, or they want to understand more on how the tailings storage facility works or what that third-party analysis says about the tailings storage facility. It's a venue to create that kind of constant communication. It's also an opportunity for us to identify and resolve issues before they become problems. So in the future, this group will be working with us on things like, well, how do we manage growth in the region? And what happens with schools or carpooling to site? All of these are great questions that really can only be solved if we're working together. And that is what the Stibnite Advisory Council does. And then the Stibnite Foundation, also created from that 2018 community agreement, is an opportunity for us to help support sustained economic growth and benefit from the mine. So now the foundation is already up and running to support local programs in the region through milestone payments. But in the future, it is structured so that it's a profit sharing model with the mine itself, and that it will build an endowment so that the economic benefits of the project can last long beyond the life cycle of this mine. And I think with that, let's see if there's a next slide, Alyssa. We've done sustainability reporting and have a roadmap out there. I encourage anyone who wants to know more about Perpetua and our performance to go look at both our sustainability reports and that roadmap. Next slide. And then if you are interested in weighing into this process, because the process works and all of the voices are listened to. So if you are interested, if you have a concern, if you have a question, if you have a compliment even, or something you like about the project or that you're looking forward to about the project, whether that's the economic benefit of a diversified economy in the region, or what a supply of antimony can do for our region, for our country, now's the time to weigh in. You can find the full supplemental either on the Forest Service website or on our website. You go to perpetuaresources.com/SDEIS. You can also attend these webinars and our office hours, and then you can send in your letter. You can do that through the CARIS system that the Forest Service has on our linked to their page, or through support.stibnite.com.